So, welcome to our new teaching series. And as Mike said, we are going to be starting a new one today. So if this is your first time here, you've come on a good week because there's no catching up to do. We are about to embark on an epic journey as a church. And you may remember, Dan last week was using some diagrams of stories on the screen. And these are patterns that you find in stories. And this was one of his charts. I don't have Dan's telescopic, pokey fishing rod. But what Dan doesn't know is that there's a laser pointer in here, which you can just about see. So we are going to be heading out on an epic adventure together. We're going to be taking off from ordinary life all the way down this end. And we're going to be heading out on a mission or a quest together. And that is we're being sent on a quest by a guy named John Mark. And before you ask, no, it's not John Mark Comer, but it is John Mark from the Bible. And this quest John Mark has set us is a question. And the question is, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus is the question that John Mark is asking us. Along the way, we will face trials along the way, and we'll be working our way towards a final test. And when we get to the final test, we need to land at an answer to the question that has been set before us and discover what the prize is for ourselves. Now, at the end of any epic quest or adventure, I've got in my head something like Lord of the Rings. Our protagonist often returns back. You can see it says prize and then return, and the protagonist often returns back home. But our hero, when they return back home, isn't just returning to life as normal, because they've been changed and they've been shaped and they've been formed by the journey that they've been on. So it's not life as normal again, even when they get back home. And that's really what John Mark is expecting and hoping for us to do also. That the end result isn't that we just recover the answer to the question, but we reorientate our life around the answer to the question and the conclusion we come to. Now, for some of you here, you might feel that this is the journey that you've tread before, and I need your help, because a protagonist never heads out alone. There's always a group that goes with them. There's a community, and you walk together on this journey. And you need this group of friends that surround you because they've got varying sets of skills and knowledge. And this is developed from years being on the road. So I also encourage you that if you feel like you're one of those individuals, also expect and open your heart to be changed as you set out on this venture. And expect to be changed almost like it's the first time that you've stepped out again. So, okay, Adam, I'm intrigued. I hear you ask, but what on earth are you going on about? This series we're starting is based on one of the books in the New Testament in our Bible. And it's one of the 4 Gospels. Can you guess which one? And if you haven't guessed it, it's hidden at the very bottom here anyway. We're looking at Mark's Gospel. And the John Mark is the Mark who's sending us on this quest. It's the author himself. So, in context, the Bible isn't just one large book like you see in front of us, but should be considered as a library. It's a group of books. Each of the books has a different theme. It's got a different author. It's got a different genre. It's been written at a different time in history. It's full of different genres like history and law and wisdom. It's full of biographies and poetries and letters. The Bible is split into 2 parts. It's split up into the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the first 2/3 of the Bible, and the New Testament is the back third of the Bible. And these are separated by what is arguably the most life-changing event to ever happen on earth that happened 2,000 years ago, which was a birth of a baby in a small town of Bethlehem in Judah. So some guy called John Mark wrote one of these books. But who was John Mark anyway? John Mark is the oldest son of Mary, and not Mary, mother of Jesus, or Mary Magdalene, or any of the other, I think there's like 40-something Marys in the New Testament, and there's at least 7 that we get to know mentioned. But it's Mary that's mentioned in the book of Acts, in Acts 12. It's where the apostles stayed in Jerusalem. The apostles were Jesus' disciples then sent out onto the mission field, and they stayed in his mum's house. Mark would have likely have been a teenager during Jesus' time in ministry, and he would have seen and heard a lot of works and seen a lot of actions whilst Jesus was in and around the city of Jerusalem. And Mark really comes into his own while he's traveling with Paul and Barnabas. Later on, you come across him in some of the other texts and scriptures of the New Testament. And Mark spends a lot of time with a guy called Simon Peter. And Simon Peter is one of Jesus' closest friends and disciples. And that really reflects on Mark's gospel account. A gospel being the good news. So Mark wrote a biography about Jesus. Why and who is Mark writing to? I think Judah wants to go up to Tots. Way more fun out there. As I just identified, Mark witnessed some of Jesus' teachings and miracles, healings for himself, and then he spent a good amount of time traveling on the road, listening to some of those teachings over and over again, much of which were being repeated by the apostles, those disciples, as they repeated Jesus' teachings. He saw witnesses, and he witnessed the apostles doing some miraculous demonstrations of God's power, and he had to capture and document all of these things. He had to capture and document all of these things. And he wrote his account alongside Peter while he was in Rome, and that's who his audience primarily was at the start. It was primarily the non-Jewish audience that was there with him. He was writing down what he was seeing in order to be shared with those that was around him. But the audience quickly grew. It grew beyond Rome, and historians indicate that Mark took his gospel down into North Africa, where Mark spent most of the rest of his time, and he became the founder of many churches there, particularly in Alexandria, when he died there in AD 68. And he became one of the first of many apostles and disciples and evangelists who were martyred for their faith. Mark's account is really intriguing because it is the earliest written scripture of the works of Jesus that we have. It was completed a mere 20 to 30 years after his death and resurrection. And while that's quite modest in modern standards, let's face it, we're just having the film about Michael Jackson coming out, and he died 16 years ago. So we like to repeat things really quickly. And in the modern day, we've got, Facebook and Twitter and this and that, so you get news really, really quickly, and it's documented really quickly. It wasn't the same back then. In fact, many texts and manuscripts that not just in the Bible, but outside of the Bible, that historians know and love and trust, were written maybe hundreds or even thousands of years after that person first spoke it. And yet we take that into university and we study it, and we look at that as fact. Now we look at Mark, and he wrote this 20, 30 years after he heard these words for the first time. Many of the people that he was writing about, many of the people that would have witnessed what Jesus saw and did, would be reading his book and affirming his teaching, and he had eyewitness accounts for themselves. So we know who Mark was. We know where he was when he was writing and who he was writing to, but that leads to the question, why? Why? No, next one. It leads to the question, why? And it's clear from reading Mark's gospel that he was so moved by what he saw. He was just compelled to share. He saw incredible things, and he couldn't help but share this good news. And he does so in the form of manuscript. He writes it down. Mark breaks his teachings into 3 sections. And out of the 16 chapters 1 to 8 are based in Galilee. That's where Jesus spent a lot of time teaching and doing miracles and healings, and spent a lot of time moving around that area. And it starts to trace that out. And it starts to look at how people were blown away by what Jesus was saying and doing. His words and his actions were really getting attention. And actually, notice how Mark jumped straight into the story. He jumped straight into the story without messing around. In contrast, Matthew begins with a very long family tree, going way, way back into the Old Testament. We've got Luke, which starts with the birth of Jesus and starts looking at that story that we look at every time it comes at Christmas. And then we've got John, who starts with this beautiful Genesis-esque imagery and poetry at the beginning, looking at how Jesus was there back at the beginning of time, as well as where he was born right there and then. But Mark jumps straight into it. It's action-packed. He's like, right, let's go. No hanging around, no messing around. The middle few chapters of Mark, chapters 8 to 10, are the disciples' journey from Galilee down to Jerusalem. And this is where the disciples begin to struggle with the understanding of what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. They start to ask questions, rightly so. They've seen things, they're trying to understand things, and they start to doubt, they start to question. But then the final 6 chapters explore how Jesus becomes that messianic king that has been promised in the Old Testament and is being carried out in his present life. So Mark has written this book, and the question that is written through all of the pages is, who is Jesus? He's encouraging the audience to engage and ask that question for themselves as they start reading this book. And we start with his own statement, his own thought. And then we've got a couple of some old prophecies to root his message into Israel's history. So, who does Mark think Jesus is? Now, if you have a Bible with you, we're going to be opening up to Mark's Gospel. And if you don't, please do make yourself known. We've got a whole bunch of some very snazzy ones, which are full of some awesome artwork and stuff. So if you are missing one, please don't hesitate to grab one or peek over your neighbour's shoulder or find a Bible on your phone, whatever it looks like. And we're going to be reading at Mark chapter 1, right at the beginning, just the first few verses as we set the scene. So this is Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 1. This is the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. It began just as the prophet Isaiah had written. Look, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you, and he'll prepare your way. He has a voice shouting in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord's coming, clear the road before him. The bold statement begins plain and simple at the start. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. But what is this Isaiah bit about? Well, Isaiah was an Old Testament prophet. A prophet is someone who speaks the words of God on God's behalf so the people can listen. He's giving direction. A prophet gives direction for the present as well as the future. And Isaiah spoke these words around 600 years before the birth of Jesus. And he was speaking about this time. 600-year time gap, and this prophecy is becoming true. Here Mark is saying the end of the Old Testament, the end of the Hebrew Bible, that there's a 400-year gap between kind of the last word spoken in the Old Testament and then Jesus' birth. And Mark is wrapping the two together. He's saying when you turn the page from the Old Testament into the New, there's a whole nother book. It continues on. The Old Testament is not finite. It's not the end, but it is the end of the beginning. The story continues on. There's another chapter. There's another book. There's another whole series of books. And Mark is writing here, pay attention, listen up. He's saying the story carries on. Let's go this way. So now to this question. Who is Jesus? And this is a question which is as prominent now as it was 2,000 years ago. It's a question asked by many. Who is this man, Jesus of Nazareth? And it has a curiosity around it. People for the last 2 millennia have been asking exactly the same question. And I can't think of many other people who have been asked of in that same way. Now, legendary singer and frontman for U2, Bono, was asked in an interview, what or who was Jesus? And this was his thoughtful response. I think it's the defining question for Christian and for a Christian, who was Christ? And I don't think you're getting let off easily saying a great thinker or a great philosopher or a great teacher. Because actually he went around saying he was the Messiah. That's why he was crucified. He was crucified because he said he was the Son of God. So either in my view, he was the Son of God, or he was completely nuts and delirious. And I find it hard to accept that millions and millions of lives, half the earth for 2,000 years, have been touched and feel their lives touched and inspired by some nutter. I don't believe it. And that's the fact. billions of lives have been touched and impacted, shaped and changed and reformed by the works and ministries and teaching of a man who lived and walked this earth 2,000 years ago. And as of right now, 2.4 billion people, roughly a third of the world's population, call themselves a Christian, call themselves a follower of Jesus. And these numbers are increasing in the secular world that we are living in. It's shaking as we have just this revival which is sweeping the nation as people are searching for a saviour, asking this exact same question: who is Jesus? Now, I've got a couple of charts looking at London, which is arguably an aggressively secular city. You can see this change for yourself, and this is a YouGov report. And in a 2.5-year period, those who would say that they do not believe in God, looking at that red line, those that say that they do not believe in God has dropped by 20%. And also notice the rise of 50% next to it of those who believe in God. That's the green line. And this next chart has got an age filter on it. You can see it on the left-hand side, 18 to 24s. That's our Gen Z. And this, in the same time period, you can see a sharp rise of 26%, up from August 22, up to the beginning of January last year. And this is just in London. This is just in London, that there's a wild change happening as people are asking this question: who is Jesus? And they're seeking for something. They're seeking for answers. And that's exactly why Mark was writing his book. There were people who were curious, and he was wanting to give them a document of answers. And all of it in that book, apart from that first thought, was simply eyewitness accounts. Things he'd gathered along the way, things he had witnessed and written down. It wasn't his own thoughts and ideas, it was simply what he'd been witnessing. God's on the move. People are curiously seeking Jesus, and their lives are being transformed and shaped by Jesus as they encounter him. Now, let's open our Bibles one more time. We're going to go back into Mark chapter 1, and we're going to read from verse 16. And what we're looking at here is the impacts Jesus had before people even really knew him. Mark chapter 1, verse 16. On the day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water. They fished for fish for a living. Jesus called to them, "Come, follow me, and I'll show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little further up along the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets, and he called to them. At once, they also followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. It's a strange invitation. Come and follow me, and I'll show you how to fish for people. That's a first century idiom for come and follow me, and I'll show you how to teach other people. I'll teach you how to gather other people. Jesus' call to follow him was met with an immediate response, not an impulse decision, but a very decided one. They'd both seen Jesus before. Andrew was with, if we'd read the bit in the middle, Andrew was with John the Baptist when he pointed out Jesus, declaring him as the Messiah, God's chosen one. Simon, in another account, in another gospel, had witnessed a miraculous so personally that the miracle catch. There was absolutely no reason for such. There was no reason to doubt. There was just trust and there was just reverence. They immediately knew the answers of the question posed by Mark, the one that we started our quest at this morning: who is Jesus? So they took up that offer to come and follow him. When Jesus says, "Come and follow me," they dropped their nets at once. They left and they followed him. And the question I encourage you to consider for yourself is, who is Jesus to you? No one can come to that conclusion for you. Have you read the evidence? Have you read one of these books? Have you read a testimony about Jesus, what someone saw and what they heard? If not, I do encourage you to do so. It's a relatively short read. I want to finish with a powerful testimony. And it's a testimony of a guy called Matthew West. He's a musician and songwriter over in America, and he is going to share, it's going to be on the screen, he's going to share how he had a revelation whilst he was on a father-daughter camp of what being a follower of Jesus means. That when Jesus says, "Follow me," he gives 3 steps. And the step is to trust in him. Jürgen's come over the video.
One day, they took the dads and the daughters deep into the woods, and we were going to do this exercise. And they blindfolded the daughters. And then they told the dads, all right, you're going to go and guide your daughter blindfolded through the woods. They said, now you're going to give your daughter 3 instructions and repeat them as many times as you can before the walk begins. And the instructions were, I will never leave you. You can ask me anything, and you should only listen for the sound of my voice. And I would make her repeat those back to me. And I said, are we good? She said, I'm good. And then we were instructed to begin our hike through the woods. And it was easy to guide her in the beginning because I could have a hand on her shoulder and we could walk and talk with each other. And I'd say, okay, there's a rock coming up, turn to your right, this kind of thing. And then with a silent signal from a camp counselor, they would tell me I had to remove my hand. And I could only guide her with the sound of my voice. And it got a little more challenging to navigate the path. Then with another silent signal from the camp counselor, I could no longer speak unless she remembered the instructions that she could ask me anything. So as you can imagine, we started to get off track in our hike. It's becoming more and more challenging. Counselor comes up as like a voice of deception, and my daughter's feeling lost and wondering where I am because she's not hearing my voice and she's not remembering to ask me any questions. Counselor comes up and says, hey, Lulu, it looks like you've gotten separated from your dad in the group. And she said, yeah, I'm not sure where he is. And she said, well, how about you follow me and I'll get you caught up with the group. And of course, as a dad, I'm overanalyzing my entire job as a parent, praying that she says, no, I'm only supposed to follow my dad. And then all of a sudden I heard, okay. She follows the camp counselor. Well, what does the counselor do? Doesn't catch her up with the group. The counselor walks her into a ditch and she doesn't realize it, but she's blindfolded in a ditch standing in front of a tree. And I'm standing there helpless, waiting and hoping that she remembers the instructions. After several minutes, I'm just standing there. The counselor comes over to Lulu and says, hey, Lulu, I don't think you're where you're supposed to be. Do you? She said, no. The voices had all quieted. The group had gone away. And she said, well, do you remember the instructions that you were given? She's like, I think so. And she thought for a couple minutes, and I'm standing there waiting. And all of a sudden I hear 4 words, Dad, are you there? And I stood there in the woods just crying. And I'm like, yeah, I'm here. Yeah. And she said, can you help me? And I said, yeah. And we got back on track and we walked back and we had this incredible moment. I thought about those 3 instructions and how many times I've forgotten them in my life, that he will never leave me. I can ask him anything and I should only listen to the sound of his voice. Coming back to those 3 principles and remembering that I have a God who's always with me, that he loves to hear the sound of his children's voice, and that he is the only source of strength and guidance in my life that I should really trust.